Hi, I'm Meredith Bagwell-Gray, an associate professor in the School of Social Welfare and a visiting professor in the School of Business through the Keeler Family Intra-University Professorship.
I'm Beth Embry, assistant professor of entrepreneurship here at the University of Kansas School of Business. During the time that our girls were at soccer practice together, we struck up a conversation around what do we do, established we're both professors here, well, then the natural flow, what's our research? And you started telling me about your amazing research in trauma and specifically post-traumatic growth for women who are domestic violence survivors. And I said, oh my goodness, I'm working on this paper. We just got invitation to revise and resubmit it, looking at the impact of trauma in the workplace. And you said, send it to me.
The exciting thing for me was to hear that someone from business was thinking about trauma, because in the social services, we think about trauma a lot. And so trauma-informed care is a pretty common concept in social work and in social services. And so to hear someone from business thinking about trauma, that was also really exciting to me to learn about, like, what are you thinking about it from the business world? So when you offered to share your paper with me, I was really eager to see how are you framing thinking about trauma and how does that connect with how I think about trauma?
And it was a win-win because with my background, obviously I know the history of trauma from being in public health and actually starting a PhD in social work before I realized that I really needed to switch my focus from the business angle. But I was like, so much science has progressed in that time period that I kind of switched my academic home, if you will, that it was so helpful to be like, make sure that all of my science is correct as to like the latest and greatest of what we know from traumatology, to make sure that I was up to speed on the literature to be citing appropriately.
Talk about that paper and why it's so important to understand how trauma impacts an individual at work.
The paper that was published is called If the Body Keeps the Score, What Happens When You Bring That Body to Work? Because what we know from traumatology is that while no two individuals experience the same trauma in the same way, it does manifest in the same way within the body, and that trauma theory maps onto the three main manifestations of thinking about hyperarousal, intrusion, constriction. Those are big words to basically say that after a trauma, your body will react in a way that you are constantly on alert. We know that there are some very real and tangible ways that if you're constantly scanning for safety, if your body is constantly on high alert, you're not able to relax your central nervous system. And you're not able to access the frontal cortex of your brain, which is what you need for critical thought, what you need for creativity, what you need for connection. That's a barrier to your full engagement and being fully present and being able to be present to the people that you're working with or the project that you're working on.
Which is what leads to our next question of like, okay,
what can we do about it? And that's the constant question we get is, okay, great, you've told me that there's these barriers. What do we do to fix this problem? One of the pieces that oftentimes gets lost is, well, the workplace is not clinical. There is so much that you can do without having a social work background or a public health background or a clinical background of any sort to still create a trauma supportive environment.
And a trauma-informed workplace actually means less disclosure is necessary because the safety is already in place.
Because the principles of trauma-informed care are pervasive in how they support all employees, all leaders. It's not unique to an individual.
And different people have thought about the principles in a different way. Variations on the principles. We are using 6 principles that we have looked at based by synthesizing these different definitions and different types of principles that we are focused on and have adapted for workplaces.
And when we thought about it, we thought holistically when it comes to workplaces. Places that employ or have a volunteer staff that consistently shows up is our broad term when we talk about what a workplace is. So the 6 principles that we've established in our theoretical model start first and foremost with safety. We've said that a couple times now because that's a very critical element, not just physical safety, but also psychological safety. Psychological safety is something that has been studied a lot in the organizational behavior literature already. And thinking about how do you create a psychologically safe team, a team that is okay to talk about, oh, I just made this mistake, or we're gonna take this risk knowing we might fail, and I can report that back to you. Ways of engaging psychological safety for your team might look like having a weekly report out of places that we failed or mistakes that we've made, so that it becomes common and accepted that the team doesn't just say, look at all these great and good things I did, but also, hey, I can be vulnerable, I can tell you about my mistakes, and we can all collectively learn from them at the same time.
And it becomes an opportunity for a growth mindset as opposed to having to feel like they have to aim for perfection all the time.
Right.
Yeah, which allows that sense of safety.
And alongside that, the second principle is trust and transparency. All of these principles really kind of overlap in many different ways in that they build on each other and reinforce each other. And so when we talk about trust and transparency, it can be at multiple levels. It's, do I trust you as an individual that I'm working with in a dyadic relationship? Do I trust my team or my department that I'm a part of? And do I trust the leadership of the organization?
Or the transparency is if something comes up that prevents them from being able to do something that they said, then they communicate that in a really clear and forthcoming way to say like, oh, this is what happened. And so that all creates that culture of trustworthiness.
Right. And gets to our third principle, which is empowerment and choice. And thinking about the ways that an individual feels empowered to not only do their work, but help inform decisions, help have a seat at the table to raise things that are of concern. And again, reinforces back as well to that psychological safety of, do I have the empowerment behind me within an organization to do the work that I need to do, as well as to actively be engaged and a part of the teams that I need to be a part of.
One of the things that I also think is important for empowerment and choice is like the choice in what types of projects do people get to work on, right? What are their strengths and abilities? Like, where do they maybe want to develop more of their human capital? If their supervisor, the management team is like, yes, I support you in taking that risk, then that's empowering and it gives them that choice. And so I think that's like an example of how that empowerment can play out in the workforce.
There's an overlap between these principles when we think about like choice reinforces safety. Want to move on to the fourth principle, which is connection and collaboration. Because what that principle enables is really the opportunity for an individual to belong and to be engaged and engaging with others as part of not only their work, but healing. Do you want to talk about why connection and collaboration is important from a trauma perspective?
One of the things is that proximal relationships and the environment can impact how someone does their narrative revisioning. And so it can impact coping and it can impact that restoring that people do. Having relationships is key to that healing process that happens.
The more that there's interactions with other people and opportunities for them to learn as well as build their professional network, that just opens up more doors into their future and also opens up a deeper sense of belonging within the organization as you're building those relationships, both from a work perspective, but also from a personal perspective. Which gets us to, I think we're on the fifth principle now. It's like I lost track of my counting, which is supportive of identity and culture and context. What do you need to show up? And it's not ignoring all those other identities that you hold to make you a little worker bee, but rather thinking about how can we complement and make sure that you have the support. And so you want to share why identity and culture and context also matters?
I was thinking a workplace that really supports and respects diversity and identity and culture is one in which people are, for example, not only aware of, but actively combating like microaggressions. Or we are going to celebrate different heritages and make sure that we are being really inclusive. And so I think that is really important if we think about like the climate that we're in, to really create safe spaces where people can bring their full selves into the workplace and they don't feel like they have to hide or mask or be someone else.
It's twofold with identity. It's being able to show up as yourself, not being tokenized, and also knowing that you can bring that diverse perspective to the table. And that not only makes the individual better able to show up and holistically belong, but it also makes the organization better. Because the more that you can bring those diverse perspectives, the better off the product or service that you're creating is, and the larger that it's going to support whoever the client or customer is that you're building that product or service for. It's both supportive of the individual, but also of the workplace and the organization itself. The final principle is having trauma-specific policies and procedures. And what this means is for the workplace as an organization to think ahead to saying, what happens if a traumatic event happens at the workplace? As well as to think through, how do we support someone if they're having a major trigger episode? And what other services do you need to support you as a human first and foremost? And that can look like, for a larger organization, the services through an EAP or through HR, but for a smaller organization, saying, what is the help and the community supports, and do we have those resources readily available and on hand to share with our employees and with our leadership team should an event occur?
One of the things in the social services is that they say trauma-specific services are important. And what is different for trauma-informed workplaces is that we don't have trauma-specific services, which is why you and I were kind of thinking, well, what would be the comparable for that? Since we don't have trauma-specific services, it seems important that we have these trauma-specific policies and procedures. So this kind of replaces that idea in the SAMHSA model, for example, of thinking, okay, we need these trauma-specific policies and procedures. So we
Talk
shift
about
to
the
the
Keeler.
Keeler professorship.
You just got the Keeler. Tell us what it is.
Okay, so I am really grateful for the Keeler Family Intra-University Professorship. It has given me the opportunity to come over here and hang out with you for a semester in the School of Business so that we can really focus on these ideas. I have concentrated amount of time this semester to dive deeper into our research and scholarship as we develop our theory of trauma-informed workplaces and also begin to study what trauma-informed workplaces look like. And so I love that you and I have combined our resources from the university to be able to do this. So I'm grateful for the Keeler Professorship. And then you also have an exciting new faculty research development.
The timing overlapped brilliantly in that we've been, talking and really mapping out these theoretical ideas. And so along with you having the Keeler Professorship to be able to spend a semester with us here in the School of Business, I was also awarded the new Faculty Research Development Grant, which is focused funding towards this project that is enabling us to actually gain the empirical evidence to support and really further develop our framework around these 6 principles, understanding how they actually are being put in place. And so we've identified 6 organizations that we know to be practicing these trauma-informed practices, whether or not they acknowledge that they are a trauma-informed organization. And they cover a wide variety of both organizational sizes, business models, the industries that they're in, as well as where they're geographically located. And the grant is enabling us to physically embed ourselves within these organizations to do direct, kind of key informant one-on-one interviews, as well as focus group discussions with members of their employee team, as well as affiliated individuals that are involved in the organizations, to really understand from these exemplar organizations that are already putting these practices into place, how are they doing it? How did these practices come into existence? So that we can then take this model, 1, validate it with empirical evidence, and 2, also bring it out into the opportunity for other organizations to say, this isn't hard to adopt. Here's some opportunities that you can utilize to learn from these other organizations to start to make your workplace more trauma-informed.
I also think it's like developing the theory further, right? So there's an inductive piece too, where we're like both applying the theory that we already have, but also like letting the data that we see like further inform, refine, shape the theory, because we're seeing new things as we observe these organizations that have these best practices. So what are we seeing that's going to influence how we think about trauma-informed workplaces? So these real live examples are like, critical to our work. And so it's a really exciting collaboration that we're doing right now.